In this video, I want to talk a little bit more about how you can use very simple homemade or handmade tools to make your own fabric for sewing. And I do mean machine sewing as well as hand sewing or crocheting squares together. So let's start with the spindles. This is the spindle you had seen before, and I now have it balanced, and it's spinning wonderfully. With using it, it tends to move up and down, so some of the wax has fallen off of it. I also made a bigger one out of a much lighter weight brass wire, and I was afraid it wouldn't spin well because commercial spindles go by, usually they tell you how much the spindle weighs. So this is my wool spindle, and it's quite a heavy whirl on a 12-inch or 13-inch stick, and it spins beautifully, wonderfully. It's very balanced. The person who made my spindles doesn't make them anymore. I was lucky to find them. There used to be a husband and wife that made spindles. This is my smaller one, which is normally for cotton. So I have one for wool and one for cotton, and the cotton one is lighter because I need it lighter in weight. I need it to spin faster for the shorter fiber length of cotton. So when I made this one, even though it's long, I figured, well, the weight of it is going to be more for cotton. It's spinning the wool wonderfully. And so what this shows us is that it's not so much the weight on the top, although that helps. It's really the hook and how balanced the overall stick is. It's a stick with a hook on it. You can spin cotton with a stick. And I have a vintage Russian spindle, which is very much a stick, with just some kind of a hand-carved bulb shape on one end. This is about the same. They work beautifully, and I can prove it. Some of this sock yarn was spun by hand on my spindles, and some was spun on a wheel, and you really can't tell the difference. I used my hitchhiker wheel to spin some of it. So this is equal to commercial sock yarn. Now I have my wool carded into about 1 ounce bats. And when you buy sock yarn, it usually comes, I think it's 1.75 ounces, but I could be wrong. So this is about 1 ounce of sock yarn that you can do yourself on a stick. So yes, I'm proud of my yarn today. Now, what I did with it is a couple of things. This is the commercial sock yarn that is being lucided on one of my lucets. And this is going to make a wonderful yarn for potholder weaving. It's loose enough not to be heavy, and structured enough to not leave gaps. It's about the thickness of a potholder loop held with the two sides together. It's going to be perfect. So, but that is time consuming, luciding the yarn that way. So what I did with some of it was I took the commercial sock yarn and lucided it on my floor lucet, and this is how this came out. This is like having gray sweatpants, gray sweatshirt. And the sock yarn is Serenity, Premier Yarn, Serenity Sock Yarn, Deborah Norville. These colors are primary. They're called primary. But because it's a variegated yarn, it's the variegation that is slightly crooked as it leads back into the gray, and not the weaving. But this is the most comfortable sweatshirt fabric ever. So all of these squares have crocheted edges. If you crochet them together, you're going to be adding a 1/2 inch in between each square, probably about a 1/2 inch total, which will matter when you're figuring out the yardage for a project. When you make, if you were to put, say, 25 or 30 of these together, and then trace your sewing pattern, stay stitch the shape, trace it with chalk, stay stitch the shape of the fabric pattern, and then stay stitch all around the pattern, tracing, and then trim it, you have your fabric pieces. It's wonderful, and it's all more or less portable. So these are the fabrics. I'll show you the loom I made in a minute. This is lucided, long lucided sock yarn, nylon loops, and this will make tarps, tote bags. They're not recommended for potholders because they're meltable, and nylon is a type of plastic, so you can think of plastic applications. Cotton potholder. These were all done on the same loom, and I'm putting together more or less fabric swatches so that I can go through and I can pick out what kind of fabric do I want to make. This is single strand fisherman wool, which is like a light DK yarn that has actually gone downhill in their quality recently. I bought a new skein, and the skein pulled apart. The yarn pulled apart in like 4 places when I was winding onto a skein winder. So, but it's still a good felting wool. This would make a very lightweight sweater. Then here's acrylic single strand worsted. Would also make a nice sweater, or blankets, afghans, shawls. And then this is long lucided 2 strands together of acrylic, super bulky, all done on one loom. So you can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is short lucided hand spun that I'm going to make another one out of. This is hand spun cotton that instead of luciding it, I crocheted it into a chain, which makes a very nice yarn to use. And with cotton, it gives cotton a lot more strength to crochet it first instead of luciding it. I also did the same thing with some fishermen, because that yarn has become kind of a low quality yarn. So I'll have a bunch of fabric swatches that I can then choose if I want to make a shirt, if I want to make pants, if I want to make whatever. I can pick out the type of finish I want with the type of fabric, as I just showed you. This is the loom I made. When I made the other video about all of the steps, these pieces of wood were grayish and long, and I hadn't cut them yet. I put them in germicidal bleach, and as you can see, I put the screws on the top and the bottom, and I used screws. And screws are actually, I like them. They're not as smooth working as cotter pins or nails, but what the screw thread does is hold the yarn in place. And on a potholder loom, I prefer that, because when I get around to taking that last row off, I hate it when the loops pop up, and you have to figure out, did I catch the loop correctly? And that can happen with weave-it looms. if you didn't thread the loom correctly, you can get a loose loop, and you're like, wait a minute, why did that happen? So I like screws. These are brass screws that I think are 7/8 of an inch long. And this is a wonderful loom that I have made all of these fabrics on. And now this is going to be my notebook. I have to figure out how to put a scrapbook together of these. And let's say with my Quilts for Veterans sets, I make tarp totes out of tarp. Homeless veterans are allowed to have a medium-sized bag. Well, now I can make them out of nylon loops. And completely washable, durable. I can make a whole tarp out of nylon loops if I want. Now, the other way to make, and I've got extra lucets here, and the reason I have those here is to show you, this is the second loom that I'm working on. It's not finished yet. This was an 8x10 frame loom. I had picked up a couple of frame looms that somebody had made, and the wood is vintage. I think it's vintage mahogany. And they were made in Germany. The person who was selling them had a cousin who had made them in Germany. And this one was 10 inches long and 8 inches across with these little pins. And when they made them, even though it's a very nice loom, one side they had extra pilot holes in between the other ones where they had made a mistake the first time. But still usable. So this is how I'm upcycling this frame loom. Personally, frame looms get to me a little bit because you're only working vertically and the sides tend to pull in. So a potholder loom has an advantage over that. It gives you a more balanced square or shape. But anyway, what I did was I cut 2 inches off of each side, made lucets out of the pieces that I cut off, and put it back together. So I had removed the bottom piece, cut 2 inches off here, 2 inches off there, and put it back together. But you can see when I put it back together, the guy hadn't drilled a hole here, and mine's a little bit off. So now I'm like carving it, and I'm going to make it more personal. It's all going to be sanded. Where the extra pilot holes are, I'm going to take these pins out. I'm going to fill all of that with wood filler, and then put the pins back in again, probably in the holes they're in now. I may leave them in place and work around them with the wood filler, and then once, to preserve the way the holes are, because it lines up very well. I added, he had 14 pegs on the top and the bottom. I actually added a peg on the top and the bottom. So here's my starting peg, and I added a 15th screw up here, and I have 15 on either side. So this is a way you can pick up a cheap frame loom. I bought 3 of these originally for like $10. The person just wanted them to be used. And I sold one that was the bigger one, and I have another one left that's 8x10 that is I left as a vertical frame loom. The first loom I showed you is 6 inches wide and has about 1/4 inch spacing on 11 pegs on each side, and that gives you 4-inch fabric, a 4-inch potholder, 4-inch fabric. Now 4 inches is very convenient for dividing or multiplying for sizes of fabric into yardage. This one has, like I said, 15 pegs, and I lost a piece of fabric here. and makes a 5-inch piece of fabric. This is Red Heart Super Saver Gold, which is really a yellow, single strand, 5-inch square. And then cotton loops. Nope, these are nylon loops. Pull in a little bit, and it's just under 5 inches. So you can see what I'm doing is I have a 4-inch square, a 5-inch square. Where Harrisville Designs came out with a 10-inch loom, I'm going to make a 12-inch frame, which will give me about a 10-inch fabric square. And then another thing you can do is, these are cross-stitch or embroidery frames where you buy the 4 pieces of wood come in a package, and they fit together like that. And so this one is 16 inches square. And all I have to do is add, I'm going to have to use nails because I don't have enough screws. I'm going to put probably 40 pegs on each side. I think I figured 40. So this will take 160 nails. It's going to give me a 16-inch square Potholder loom. Now, I had a 12-inch pin loom before with a 3-pin setup, and it was difficult to work. And with weave-its, when you warp a weave-it loom, you're layering 3 layers of fabric. With a Potholder loom, the reason it's so much easier to work is you've got 1 layer of fabric that is more of a balanced weave, and when you add lucided yarn, you actually get that 3-layer effect, only your yarn is lucided instead of layering the warp 3 times. But I think the crocheted edge of a Potholder fabric gives you an easier choice of sewing them together. You can either whip stitch them if you want them to lie flat, or you can add the crochet, which adds like a sashing. You could think of it as a sashing like a quilt. If you were going to use squares, you could do 2 rows of crochet in between each square, and there's your sashing. So you can do everything that you would do with store-bought fabric with squares. And then the other thing, because what I'm going to do, I have to exercise my leg. So I'm going to spin 1 bat a day. It took me, some of this was hand spun. It took me 15 minutes to spin a 1-ounce bat with my wheel, my floor wheel. And then I set the twist in this, and I put it on that large knitting knotty you just saw overnight. I made this out of sticks. You can also buy them. That one is, I think it's a 2-yard. I think it's a 2-yard. It goes by how many yards it holds. It's about 24 inches tall anyway. I had it on there overnight. It was dry, completely dry this morning. Now I'm ready to start again. Now if I decide to use the spindles instead of the wheel, I have smaller 12-inch knitting knotties, which are just more portable and will hold about a spindleful. And I might have a little bit of faster production because I can spin one, fill a bobbin, fill a spindle, put it on here, take it off, set the twist, fill it again, you know. So the time-consuming aspect of doing everything by hand is only really time-consuming if you're looking to do it faster. I needed to get at least 1 bat spun. I went to my floor wheel. It would have taken me probably a couple of days, a little at a time, to spin it this way. And if I sat down and just did the whole bat, probably 2 hours. which was, like I said, 15 minutes on a 4-wheel. So a lot of choices. With any of the Potholder looms, you can crochet or loose it, or just hold yarns 2 strands together. And in the process of learning this method of spinning your own yarn, loosening it or crocheting it, getting it ready to be made into fabric, and then making your fabric or your clothes, being the final stage of sewing the fabric into clothes. When you learn all of this, there are like 15 ways with each step that you can jump off and change it. So with spinning, you have different types of methods of spinning and different fibers. With the loosening or the crocheting, or even a knitting Nancy, you can pick which way you want to prepare the yarn to be fabric. And then with the weaving, I'm sticking with the Potholder loom idea for this because of the portability and the consistency. Every square I make on this loom is going to be that size with the same yarn. When I warp my rigid heddle loom, just for one reason or another, it could be 4 inches shorter, 6 inches longer. It might be just a little bit narrower because it's a bad day. You don't get that with Potholder looms. But what you can change with Potholder looms, I already have like 9 different fabric finishes. So you can really say, wow, what do I want to make? Do I want to make an alpaca sweater? Do I want to make a cashmere hat? You know, so this gives you options. And it's all easy to do. The hardest part is measuring twice so that you only have to cut once, or having access to wood so that you can fix your mistakes. Don't worry about being a carpenter if you're not a carpenter, because what you're doing is you're making your own tool. Something went wrong the day I was drilling this, and it was off. So wood filler is going to go in there. And this, you know, so who's going to care if I've got a mistake on my loom and I've got wood filler in it? Who's going to care? Nobody. I'll be able to use the loom. I'll sand it all down and probably paint it. And, wow, I'm off to the races, being able to make any kind of fabric I want, which then goes to my sewing machine.